On today's show, Roger Dooley, the neuroscience marketing expert, shares with us how Uber, Amazon, and Google have grown as a result of obsessing about reducing the amount of friction that consumers must experience to do business with them. Neuroscience marketing expert Roger Dooley and a Carnegie Mellon graduate, Roger Dooley, shares with us the power of Neuroscience Marketing 101, the importance of reducing friction with your ideal and likely buyers, and why you and I must both obsess about making it easy for customers to do business with you and I. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, the neuroscience marketing expert of choice, Roger Dooley, teaches us about the power of frictionless business processes.
Some shows don't need a celebrity narrator to introduce the show, but this show does. 2 men, 8 kids, co-created by 2 different women, 13 multi-million-dollar businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Thrive Time Show.
3, 2, 1, here we go!
Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, and we'll show you how to get here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now we here.
Yes, 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 and yes. Thrive Nation, on today's show, we are interviewing an expert in the field of neuroscience marketing, Roger Dooley. Mr. Roger Dooley, welcome on to the Thrive Time Show. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm doing great, Clay. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, could you introduce the listeners to what neuroscience means? We have a lot of entrepreneurs who are listening who we know what the word marketing is, but I'd love to be clear on the definition of things. Could you break down?
Sure,
what
and
neuroscience
when
means?
you talk about neuromarketing, Clay, there are varying definitions out there. Very broadly, it is use of the tools of neuroscience to do better marketing. I define it even more broadly than that and say it's using our understanding of how our brains work to market better. And there are some real specific neuromarketing techniques like measuring brain waves using EEG while people are watching advertisements or consuming content. There are things that aren't quite neuroscience, but tools like eye tracking and implicit testing and facial coding, reading people's facial expressions. Those fall under the sort of broad category of neuromarketing. And I like to even include using brain and behavior research to make marketing better, because those kinds of techniques can be applied by anybody, not just by big brands that can afford fancy studies using neuroscience equipment, but just about any size business, even small entrepreneurs can take the findings of behavioral science and psychology to market better.
You said the word, I think you said EEG. What does EEG stand for?
Okay, that's electroencephalogram, and it is a medical tool that's been repurposed by marketers, as many of these tools have been. There's another tool I did mention, it's fMRI, that actually is a brain, sort of almost like a real-time brain scan that looks at brain activity, and they can see which areas of the brain are lighting up. So, you can be watching an advertisement. They can see which parts of your brain are lighting up and trying to determine what kind of emotion you're experiencing and whether you're engaged or not engaged. EEG is a much less expensive. The fMRI machines are huge machines that are noisy, and you sort of go in this little narrow confined tube because that's the way it works. You need that equipment, but EEG is a lot simpler. They are little sort of caps that have electrodes, can be a lot of electrodes or even just a few electrodes, and those attach to your scalp, and again, they measure brain waves, but from the outside. They aren't actually doing sort of a 3D image. They're measuring the activity outside, but that can still yield some pretty useful results.
You are just infinitely fascinating to me. So I'm sorry if I go off the rails too much here before we get into your book, but I just want to, I know the listeners out there are wanting to know these things, and I'm going to get a lot of, emails if I don't ask you some of these questions. So let's say I have a smartphone with me, okay? And I'm on a date with my wife, and it's a great date at a great restaurant. It's and let's just say I'm behaving badly. I've got my phone out, faced up, and I get a complaint from a customer, that comes in. complaint comes in the email or something, or a Facebook notification.
I think you're already in trouble, Clay.
Okay, so let's just say, because I think a lot of our listeners, though, they can relate to this because they're self-employed. I have a rule now. I've learned, it took me a while, put the phone in the car, leave the phone there. But what kind of readings would somebody see on an EEG machine? Or what's going on like a neuroscience level to somebody who's receiving a complaint while on a date with their wife, while people who are texting underneath the table about something bad while being in a meeting that's very good, people that are Facebooking while at church physically but mentally not at church. Can you talk to us about what would show up on an EEG or a...
That's a good question, Clay, and one that I can't directly answer. Okay. Typically, EEGs would not be used in a sort of a real setting like that because they require wearing this special cap with these electrodes, right. And so it's relatively difficult to do it in a setting that feels natural. Although if somebody wears it for a while, say while they're watching TV in a controlled site or something, they can kind of forget about it. So that works, but it might not be quite as effective in a restaurant. As far as what it would show, typically. And there are different companies that have different interpretations of EEG and different ways they use it. But I would say that one typical approach would be to measure the level of engagement and the level of emotion and also attention. It might be combined with eye tracking so that, for instance, if you were watching a TV commercial or a television show like Game of Thrones, they could be looking at what you were gazing at, determining what part of the screen you were looking at, as well as have an idea of your level of emotional arousal and, perhaps an idea even of the specific emotion. Although when you start getting down to specific emotions, it's a little bit harder to interpret.
Wow. Okay. So now, when did you figure out that you wanted to do? You wanted to be an expert in neuroscience marketing, or when did you get interested in the field of neuroscience?
Well, it was actually quite accidental. It really goes back maybe to my very deep roots. Way back in my college days, I was interested in psychology. I minored in psychology, even though I was an engineer. And I also was interested in advertising. For some reason, when I was in the library, supposed to be studying organic chemistry, instead I would be reading Advertising Age. But that was a long time ago, and I really set that stuff aside for a long time. But about 15 years or so ago now, I saw two fields coming together, advertising or marketing and neuroscience. And I certainly wasn't the first person to see that, but there were already, even then, a few early neuromarketing service providers. But I decided to start a blog and a website. I registered a domain, neurosciencemarketing.com, which was still available at the time because not many people were thinking about that. And I got traction. People started reading and replying, but I found myself steered away a little bit from the sort of pure tools of neuroscience, things like that fMRI or EEG, mainly because those at the time were only available to big brands, and instead focusing more on some of the tools of psychology and social science and behavioral science, things like Cialdini's 6 principles, which more recently grew to 7 principles. The work of Dan Ariely and other behavioral economists and behavioral scientists.
In the weird world that we live in, if your name was Kanye West, I wouldn't have to interrogate you so much about your resume and your background. But I know a lot of our listeners want to know, because I want to get into this book and make sure that you have that platform where people know that you really know what you're talking about. Can you share with the listeners where you went to college and kind of what your entrepreneurial journey has been before writing this new book?
Sure. Briefly, because being an old guy, I've got a longer resume than some, but not necessarily better. I did my undergrad work at Carnegie Mellon. I majored in chemical engineering. A few years later, I picked up my MBA at the University of Tennessee. And I really visualized myself as a sort of a corporate career guy. I started off doing engineering, but pretty quickly moved into management. And when I was about 30, I had really kind of hit what I felt was a key point in my corporate career. I was in charge of strategic planning for a Fortune 1000 company, which for me was really great. I loved my job. I thought it was wonderful to be so involved in somewhat of steering of the corporation, although I wasn't really the ultimate decision maker, but being right there, part of the process. And I chose that moment to bail out and become an entrepreneur. I co-founded a direct marketing business that was aimed at the early owners of home computers. They were just coming online, and the big box stores were selling the computers, but did not either. They didn't understand the product, for one, and they didn't have the wealth of accessories and software that were really available out there. So the only way to get those was through, at the time, what was called mail order. This was pre-e-commerce. And then so I did that for quite a long time. And over the years, that morphed into some different businesses with a much more digital emphasis. I had an IT outsourcing business for a while. That took me into digital marketing and SEO. And back in 2001, I co-founded another business called College Confidential, which was designed to help people with the really confusing college admissions process. And in the U.S., it is really confusing. In Australia, there are, I think, about 39 universities. In the U.S., there are 3,000 to 4,000 institutions of higher education with great differences between them, and they're scattered over all 50 states. So it's just an almost impenetrable process. So this was to be an information site where people could come for informed content that was written from a neutral perspective, not trying to sell anything, just to be informative. But also, I started building a community there. And that ended up becoming the tail that wagged the dog. It grew to be a huge site. Years ago, it hit 40 million page views a month.
40 million page views a month. That's huge. Huge, Roger.
It was. It really succeeded beyond our dreams. We ended up selling the business to part of the Daily Mail group because it was actually a really good fit. We were having difficulty monetizing, which is something that probably many entrepreneurs experience. You got a great idea, but and it's working, except hard to make money at. We thought that as soon as we had built this platform, colleges would be falling all over themselves to advertise, which it turned out they weren't. They were very traditional, and they needed a much more intense sales approach. The company that we ended up working with had a dedicated sales force of like 25 people who were very embedded in these universities. And on the other hand, they were a print business, and they did not get digital all that well, where we brought the digital expertise. So as acquisitions go, it was a pretty benign one. The site continued to grow for years, and it was altogether not that bad of an experience, and it really helped both organizations a lot.
So,
after that, eventually, after the sale, I gradually decreased my involvement in the business and began writing about neuroscience and marketing.
So, for the listeners out there that I get, because I want to get into your book, and that's where I want to spend most of our time, because your new book, Friction, is awesome. Can you share with us what degrees do you have from Carnegie Mellon, or did you get a degree from Carnegie Mellon?
Yes, bachelor's degree in chemical engineering of all things, which I guarantee I have not used chemical engineering knowledge directly for years, but engineering is always a good thing to have. It kind of teaches you to treat the world as it is, as opposed to the way you want it to be.
Okay, now Thrive Nation, here we go. I want you to strap on a helmet and get ready, because we have a guy with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering who went to school at Carnegie Mellon, and he's going to get here on this microphone, and he's going to share with you some knowledge bombs and some truth from his new book, Friction. Roger, what first inspired you to write this book?
Well, I'm going to detour, Clay, for 1 second and tell you something amusing about my time at Carnegie Mellon. At the time, they were one of the few schools that actually had a really strong computer science department. They were just like one of the 3 schools in the country that maybe had a significant one. And I was very interested in that, and I was going to transfer into that area. And my academic advisor told me that computers were a fad and that there would always be a need for chemical engineers. So, I ended up in the digital world by a circuitous manner, but it just shows how weird things turn out at times. Who knows, had I switched, what my career would have looked like. But anyway, I'm sorry. The question was about the book.
Yeah,
what was it, Clay?
Well, your new book, Friction, it's powerful. And I just wanted to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
I was focused for quite a while on web conversion and using some of these psychology-based techniques to convert better. In other words, to turn more of your website visitors into customers or leads, if that was your objective. And there's certainly a lot of territory there. And I came across the work of B.J. Fogg at Stanford, who created his Fogg behavior model. This is, you need three things to either create or change a behavior. You need motivation. The person has to want to do it or want the result of doing it.
Motivation, got it.
Yeah, okay. And there has to be a trigger or a prompt, typically something to sort of get the ball rolling. It could be anything from a phone call to a pop-up ad to a visible call to action on a website.
Got it.
And then they have to have what he calls ability. And that translates into lack of difficulty. In other words, they have to be able to do it. And hopefully it's not going to be too hard, because the easier it is, the more likely it is that that behavior will occur. And I translated that a few years later into my own model called the persuasion slide that tried to involve both conscious and unconscious factors in each part of it, which I'm not going to go into the details here. We don't have time for that. But one of the elements is friction. And in the physical world, that's when the kid gets stuck partway down the slide because it's not slippery enough. And in our metaphorical or marketing world, it is when things are too difficult, either because they're actually difficult or because they seem difficult to the customer. And I found that that was the most interesting element of the slide, because it was often the easiest and cheapest thing to fix. You know, you can always increase people's motivation if you give them free stuff, right? Or if you give them discounts. But those things cost real money. Where if you can simply make things easier, it may cost you a little bit up front to fix your bad processes, but once you fix that, it'll just keep working for you forever. Look at one-click ordering for Amazon. That's been working for them for 20 years now.
Yeah, I want to tee this up here for you here, Roger. Maybe this will make you'll think less of me as a result of this, but it's just you and me talking with 500,000 people listening. For some reason, the other night, my wife and I wanted to watch a movie on like Netflix. Now, we're very intentional. We have 5 kids. So it's like, hey, we can watch this documentary or this particular show. We want to make sure we put good information into our kids' craniums. And that thing, it took about, I don't know. It was the internet speed. We have an internet problem. My house flooded recently, so we're working off a Wi-Fi hotspot right now. And that pinwheel had spun a few times, or the internet we were waiting on the internet to load. It was just spinning. And it seemed like hours, but I think it was maybe 2 seconds, but it seemed like weeks, but it might have been a max of 3 seconds. I mean, I feel like I needed to go shave again. I feel like I'd been waiting decades, but my wife pointed out it was maybe 4 seconds or so. How long can consumers wait for a site to load or for something to work before they go, I'm going to bed? Because I was about ready to go, let's just go to bed. I mean, how long can the average person, wait on technology before they get done with it? They're tired of it. They say, I got to move on. It's too tough.
Well, Clay, that's a moving target, because things keep getting faster and better.
I know.
And I think one thing that many businesses don't realize is that customers are not comparing your business to your direct competitors. Like if you think, well, okay, my load speed or my website isn't the best, but boy, it's way better than the people that I compete with. That doesn't really matter, because they are comparing you to the load times at Google and at Amazon. They're comparing your in-person experience to the experience that Uber offers. And the fact that you suck a little bit less than your competitors doesn't really cut it. They have an absolute standard. I think one great example, I can look up anything that I've ordered from Amazon, I think like for the last 15 years, with just a few clicks. No other business that I deal with will do that for me with such ease. But I expect it now. A few years ago, I didn't expect it. I just figured, well, okay, they can only keep so many orders online, and then they go into, some warehouse someplace or whatever. But hey, if Amazon does it, why can't you? It's not like hard drives are that expensive these days.
Okay, that right there. Someone's going to have to marinate on that for a few hours. You said simply because, you suck a little bit less than your competitors, it doesn't matter, because people are comparing you to Amazon, to Google, to. So I'd like for you to, let's just open up your book. We're going to open up your book, Friction, for a second. We're going to open up the book. And when I open up the book, Friction, the Untapped Force That Can Be Your Most Powerful Advantage, give me a few of the knowledge bombs or maybe a few of the ample examples that you provide in your book about how Amazon, Google, and Uber have improved their customer experience to reduce the amount of friction and thus make it easier to do business with them.
Right. Well, Clay, I already mentioned one-click ordering, and it doesn't seem like that remarkable of a thing. I remember,
It's huge.
But when it came out, actually, Jeff Bezos was talking about frictionless shopping way back in 1997, where most people were still trying to figure out what e-commerce was.
Right.
And they patented one-click ordering in 98. And at the time, I remember hearing about that, saying, "Oh, they can't patent that. No, you can't patent something just like click a button and place an order." Well, in fact, it turned out that you could patent it. And they defended it in court at great cost and eventually forced their competitors like Barnes & Noble to add a click because Barnes & Noble was doing it. They had mimicked the one-click ordering, and they ended up having to add a second click. Now, you say, well, what's the big deal? One extra click in a process. But Amazon does not think that way. And in fact, someone else who didn't think that way at the time was Steve Jobs, because they were just starting up their music store then to go with their iPad. And they said, okay, we need this feature. We want it to be as frictionless as possible for our customers to order. So they didn't mess around. They didn't try and fight the patent like Barnes & Noble did. They just went to Bezos and licensed it. And they incorporated it. And of course, we all know what happened. They became by far the dominant music store. So, we don't think about those little tiny steps that, a click here, click there. Oh, we got to scroll down a little bit. Well, that's not a problem. It's easy. But all that stuff makes a difference. Another thing that Amazon has done about a dozen years or so ago, they saw that customers were struggling with these retail packages, these plastic clamshells that are heat sealed, and they're very nice for retail. They're hard to steal from the store. They show off the product nicely because you can see through them. But once you get them home and try to get into them, you need implements. You can't get into them with your bare hands. You risk stabbing yourself with sharp plastic edges, and it's a real struggle. And they said, okay, we can fix this. And they came up with frustration-free packaging. And these are simple cardboard boxes. Customers can get into them easily. They do not require power tools. The risk of injury is low, and they're better for the environment. And here's the amazing thing, Clay. Not only did people like the packages better, Amazon found that there was a 73% reduction in negative feedback about the products that were packaged that way. So the ease of dealing with the packaging ended up making the product itself seem better. So, I mean, to me, it's people don't even recognize that when they make customers work harder, that affects the whole experience.
I want to tell myself real quick, if you're out there and you're married to somebody like me who just destroys cereal boxes, I really don't eat a lot of cereal, but any kind of box that requires any type of tactile skill, I end up just bludgeoning the thing with a sharp object to get into it. And there's certain brands, though, that have figured it out to make it really easy. But I'm not a very intuitive guy, Roger. It's like it's hard for me to figure stuff out. And I remember the first time I had to use an Uber. I was in Denver, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I was in Denver, Colorado, to meet with my a good friend and business partner with OxyFresh, and I'm there in Denver. And he says, "Clay, why don't you just Uber?" And I go, "Huh? What's Uber?" This was like 7, 8 years ago. He says, "Why don't you just Uber?" And I'm going, "How do you Uber?" He goes, "Well, you download the app, and then you book it." And I remember just, it's going to take forever. It's going to be like going on the IRS website. It's going to, Roger, you know the drill. I'm thinking this is going to be some new technology. I don't have time to learn a new technology. All I want to do is get home from the Four Seasons restaurant with my beautiful wife. And then I went on to Uber, and it was like, clicked here, bada bing, bada boom, boom. And I booked my Uber. That was awesome. It was so much easier than waving at a taxi. It was so much easier than calling the hotel to get a taxi. Can you talk to us about Uber and how they've been able to use frictionless or marketing or systems or processes that reduce the amount of friction to dramatically grow that brand?
Well, yeah, I think there's two pieces that you highlighted there, Clay. First of all, is the onboarding process was simpler than you expected. And another company that was worth a whole lot of money, WhatsApp, grew in part because their onboarding process was so simple. didn't have to set up a username, didn't have to choose a password. I saw a user experience guy tear down their onboarding process, and you could be up and running in less than 2 minutes and inviting your friends who, of course, could then be onboarded easily themselves. And that's one reason why, even though there were tons of messaging apps available, WhatsApp grew like crazy. Ended up being worth, 25 billion or whatever Facebook paid for it. So that's part of the process. But I think the bigger thing is with Uber, that people did not realize how much friction there was in the taxi process. And that's something that I guess I hope that I can accomplish with my book, is letting people see friction where it exists, even where they haven't been aware of it. Because you just sort of accept it. Like, unless you had a really bad taxi experience, like you had to stand in the rain for 20 minutes trying to find one, you didn't think too much about it. You got in, it was okay, you paid at the end. It wasn't until Uber came along and showed you, wow, it could be so much easier to get a ride, to see where they're at. If they're not there at exactly when you expected them, you can see they're just down the block, as opposed to wondering, hey, did they lose me? Did they, get my call? Where's my cab? And then, you can see the route. You can see when you're going to arrive. You know that the driver isn't going to take you the long way to rack up some extra money. And then getting out even is so simple. I often, especially when I'm traveling, I try and pay by credit card if I take a conventional taxi. And that is a high friction experience. Typically, in fact, in other countries in the United States, I often find first the driver says, no, machine's not working. And then you say, well, because they don't want to pay the fee, I guess. And I say, well, okay, I got no cash, so what are we going to do? And then he reaches under the front seat, pulls the machine out, fires it up, tries to get an internet connection on it. And, it's like a 3-minute process. And then you've got to figure out how to tip on it. And it's so stressful when, with Uber, it's like, here you are, goodbye. And it's that simple. And now, before I never really thought too much about the taxi process. But of course, now if I have to ride in a conventional taxi, it's like, wow, this really sucks compared to Uber. It's once you see it, you really can't stop seeing it.
Now, did you go to Manhattan very much there, Roger?
Not too often, but I go there occasionally.
One thing that I have discovered about the Manhattan is that everybody in Manhattan is taking a car that they don't own because it's like impossible to find a parking space everywhere, And it was like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have experienced the idea of like, hey, waving down a taxi cab and paying them in this process. We've all had the thought, there's got to be a better way. Perhaps the vehicles could smell better. It would be awesome if we could rate the driver who just drove as though he was trying to engage in some kind of gem or jewelry heist. You're in the car feeling like this guy's trying to race against the government and the police.
Yes, I've had those drivers.
Oh, and it just smells. There's certain smells that have been discovered inside these vehicles. And I'm sure many, many people have thought about, there's got to be a better way. But the folks at Uber actually obsessed about it and sat down and did it. They're entrepreneurs. The folks at Google sat down and thought about it. Larry and Sergey thought about it. Travis at Uber thought about it. Talk to me about, for the listeners out there who are going, okay, I believe in this dream. I'm going to buy this book right now, Friction, the Untapped Force That Can Be Your Most Powerful Advantage. On a practical level, how can most small business owners act on what you're teaching today? What are a few things that we can, action steps that all of our small business owners who are listening right now could immediately begin to apply within their own businesses?
Well, I think that once you start seeing the varied examples, and if you've glanced at the book, you know that there are quite a few different kinds of examples in the book, you start seeing friction in your own processes. You can start seeing things that maybe your customers don't complain about even, but that you see could be done quicker with less effort. And that's how you win. If everybody's complaining about your process, you're probably already dead. It's past the point of no return. But if people are tolerating it, but you can see ways to improve it, that's how you gain share against your competition. And, at the beginning of the book, I start with a short fable about friction goggles. And I suggest that at the end of the book, people will each have their own metaphorical pair of friction goggles. There are no real goggles involved. But what I mean by that is that they will start seeing friction where they didn't see it before. In the same way that I was describing, we see friction in taxis now that we didn't really see before Uber. And there's a reason for that. There's actually some neuroscience. Let's circle around back to neuroscience, Clay.
Yeah.
The brain has what is called the reticular activating system, the RAS, and its job is to filter out everything that isn't important. So if you are crossing the street in Times Square, it will filter out everything except the crosswalk sign, oncoming cars, and the people right around you, because you don't need all those 10,000 other distractions trying to confuse you and having you stop in the middle of the street wondering what you're doing. Now, that's usually a very useful thing, but it does filter out stuff that you can see. And so, like, if you're always have a certain experience, you just don't see the friction in that experience because it's normal. I can give you an example of how perhaps you and maybe our listeners have experienced their RAS in action. If you've ever bought a new car, and like the week after you buy it, suddenly you start seeing all these other cars that look like yours. Wow, same model, same color. Holy cow. I never noticed that before. Where were they? Those cars were always there. It's just that now your particular car has assumed a much greater importance to your RAS because it's yours, and it starts seeing other ones like it elsewhere and letting them through to your brain, where before it just screened them out with all the others. And so once you start seeing examples of friction by reading about them in the book and also by experiencing them as you look at your business or your own interactions with other businesses, you will see more and more friction because your brain will say, oh, okay, this is important. This is unnecessary effort. I should pay attention to that. And it may be kind of frustrating. It's sort of like developing your palate for wine. It's good news and bad news. The cheap wine that you used to like before, it doesn't taste quite as good now. But at the same time, you can appreciate and understand wine a lot better. So you may be frustrated as you see more friction, but at the same time, it gives you a chance to do something about it.
Now, I want to ask you what's wrong with my reticular activating system. This is a new word for our listeners, and I just want to make sure I'm kind of, stepping in the water with this word here.
Well, I had to throw some neuroscience at you there, Clay.
Well, my wife and I took my wife on a trip down to Cancun. If you can picture it, all-inclusive resort. We're down there, and they have iguanas that are like the size of a dog.
I've seen those. Yeah, in Cozumel, Cancun. Yeah, they're huge.
And so we're walking down the path, and every tourist and everybody's like, wow, it looks like there's an iguana. We should probably get out of the way. But because of my reticular activating system or myopic focus, whatever that is, it's like my superpower that allows me to sit down and write a book. I can write a book, in 4 consecutive days and not really be interrupted, just boom, 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 boom. Not distracted at all, not curious at all who's calling me or emailing me, just totally just myopically focused. That is my superpower is also my super weakness. And I seriously, it's scary sometimes. I stepped on an iguana about the size of a dog, and my wife watched it happen, and she was like, oh, why would you do that? How did you not see it? And all the tourists are like, oh. And then after dealing with that situation, my wife joked with me about it, and then I hop in the pool. I'm splish splash, I'm swimming in the pool, having a good time. And then there's an iguana that gets into the pool, and it's just like,
that's the one that he stepped out. He was waiting for his chance to take you under.
No, and seriously, this iguana hops in and and I'm just swimming around. Everyone else gets out of the pool. I'm oblivious to it. Another example is when my wife talks to me while I'm driving, I immediately go into the shoulder and almost kill our family every time. So I just want to know what's wrong with my reticular activating system.
I don't know. Maybe it's filtering a little bit too much there. And, if you're going to step on a large lizard, it should probably let that information through,
Can I fix that? I mean, because seriously, that's like my superpower.
I don't know. Maybe watch some nature videos about iguanas, and that'll work.
Okay. So
or step on. I guarantee if you step on one and he turns around and bites you, that will tell your brain, okay, this is really important to pay attention to, and you'll never step on a second one.
Oh my gosh, I gotta work on that. I gotta.
Pain is a motivator.
There we go. I gotta have Andrew just go out and get a iguana, set it out there. When I walk in near it, he just needs to slap me with a big stick or something, and then I'll learn the system. Now, a couple final questions I have here for you. People are out there, they're thinking about buying Friction. They're gonna, and I know I bought a copy of it, but somebody's thinking about buying a copy of the book right now, and they're going, well, I'm looking on Amazon right now, and it's one click, but it's $17.53 on Prime. I think hardcover is $24.75, and they're going, I don't want to spend money on a book that could change my life when I could just buy regrettable purchases at a local convenience store and lottery tickets and cheap wine. Why would I possibly invest in my future when I could buy these things I don't need? Can you give us the $24.75 pitch as to why everybody needs to pick up a copy of this book? Because I perused the book. I've gone through the book, and I'm saying you should buy this book. But maybe somebody else has some objections. Encourage our listeners. Why should we all check out your book?
Okay. I think rather than just justifying my book, I think that it might have been Seth Godin that says, a book is the best investment that you can make because, for, 15, 20, 25 bucks, you can benefit from this person's years and years of experience and detailed research. If you wanted to hire that person for a day to advise you,
Right.
that would cost you thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yep.
But for this minimal sum, you can get something that they worked on for years. I mean, I would say the typical business book, the author has spent probably at least a couple years writing it, and
Right.
it is based on even more years of experience and research. So, it's really a very small expense, and again, it's a lot cheaper than other types of learning. And one other thing I would point out too is that these days it is. Audible or audiobooks are becoming an increasingly popular format, and they're actually catching up to ebooks as a format because people can consume them anytime, when they're driving, when they're in the
Right.
gym, when they're going for a walk. And there, it's only one credit, so it's pretty democratic system. It's great, but as far as friction goes, I think that what I would hope that people can get out of it and justify that purchase price are, first of all, seeing friction in their own customer experiences. In other words, where can their business do a little bit better job of serving the customer, eliminate those minor points of friction, just that extra scroll, that extra click, that extra field in the form, that isn't absolutely necessary, but someone said, oh, we ought to ask them that, stuff like that. But once they start seeing it there, they'll also start seeing those friction points in their own company, procedures that aren't that efficient, meetings that aren't really accomplishing anything, that have people in them that don't really need to be there. There's a study that was published in the Harvard Business Review that estimated that every year U.S. businesses waste $3 trillion in what they call organizational drag. And drag is another word, being an engineer, for friction. What they meant by that was businesses are wasting the time of their people with rules that cause extra effort but don't really produce a benefit for the company. I mentioned meetings, dealing with email that isn't absolutely necessary. People spend a couple hours a day on email,
True.
Studies show, and that is not usually very productive time spent. Occasionally, sure, you can, part of it might be very important, but a lot of it's just dealing with stuff that you got to clear your inbox that it probably shouldn't have been in there in the first place. And there's so much friction. Like, people understand that, wow, we got to make it as easy as possible for the customers to order, but the flip side of that is you need to make it as easy as possible for your own people to do the job, their job, because, they will, first of all, people understand when they are wasting their time. If they're being forced to do something because this is the procedure, this is the process, they know that, oh, gee, this is not productive, but I got to do it. And that is not motivating. A Gallup poll showed that 85% of the people they surveyed were not engaged with their job or their employment situation.
Agreed.
Yeah, they've kind of mentally checked out somewhat.
Could you repeat that real quick, though? Because
Yes.
that right there is a hard stat that somebody out there needs to embrace. Because what you just said, I know that you're a calm guy, but that's an intense statistic. Can you repeat that statistic one more time?
Yeah, the Gallup survey showed that 85% of the people they surveyed were not engaged with their employer. So, and one reason for that is because, their time isn't respected. Their effort isn't respected. There's this sort of, many companies have this sort of command and control situation where they have procedures that are based on lack of trust. Well, okay, this is how the expense reporting system works, and these are the forms you have to fill out. This is the documentation you have to provide. And is that as streamlined as it could be? No, but there's this either lack of trust in some cases that requires extra work, or it's just a poorly designed process that nobody really took a look at. They just figured, hey, people want their money, they're going to fill out the darn forms. So, one way of combating that lack of engagement is to show that you as a company or you as a boss are actively trying to make your employees' job easier. And that's something that, really changes people's perception when it's not about, gee, how can I get these people to work harder and get their job done faster? Instead, it's how can I make their job easier? That's a whole different mindset, but it has a whole lot of benefits.
You know what I'm going to do right now is I'm not going to say that if you don't buy a copy of Roger's book, I'm not going to say that you are a communist if you don't buy a copy of Roger's book. But I am saying that the communist national anthem, which I typically don't play a lot on the show, just happens to be playing in the background right there. And I don't know how that was queued up. I'm not really sure why Andrew would queue up a song like this at this time. I don't know, but I just say that some would say, not me, no. I'm not one to use apophysis to push book sales. I'm just saying is that Andrew is a man of purpose, a man whose mic is muted, and a man who has no ability to defend himself. But I know that he is only playing the communist national anthem right now through just mere coincidence there. But if you don't, you gotta go buy the book. And it's not because we're not saying you're a communist if you don't buy a copy of Roger's book. But Roger, if I do want to buy a copy of your book, make it frictionless for me. Where can I buy the book?
You can buy it most places where books are sold. Amazon, of course, is probably the lowest frictions, especially since I write about how low friction they are in the book. But if you like in person, you can check out Barnes & Noble and other bookstores as well.
Roger, it has been an absolute delight having you on the show. Hopefully, this was not the worst podcast. I always want to be the second worst or the third of the worst, but never the worst podcast you've ever been on. But I really do appreciate you, my friend. You are a wealth of knowledge.
Well, Clay, this is far from the worst. It's been a blast. And I have to tell you, though, it's the first one where I've heard Soviet martial music playing, assuming that's what that was. It sounded like it. That is a first. And, I think that part of their problem was excess bureaucracy and red tape. And no doubt was one of the reasons that they changed systems.
And their tape was actually red, too, in the literal. Not only the figurative, but the literal right there. That's very impressive. Roger is just dropping knowledge bombs left and right. Roger, thank you for being on the show, my friend.
Well, thank you, Clay. It's really been a lot of fun.
All right, take care. And now, without any further ado, it's time to end this show with a boom. But if you're out there today and your website is running slow, you're creating friction for your customers, just email us to info@thrivetimeshow.com. Email us to info@thrivetimeshow.com. Email us right now. That's you. I'm talking to you. Is he talking to me? No, I'm talking to you. Which one of us? First two of us in the car. Stop it. Just email us to info@thrivetimeshow.com today, and we will tell you how to make your website faster and how to make your website rank higher in the Google search engine results. And so now, without any further ado, we have a neuroscience marketing boom. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, boom.
No.